Hey guys, tonight we're stepping through the gates of a 19th century American frontier cavalry fort as the sun dips below an endless sea of prairie grass. You can already feel the grit between your teeth, smell the mixture of horse manure and wood smoke, and hear the distant bugle call echoing off rough timber walls. This isn't the glamorous cavalry of Hollywood westerns. This is monotonous guard duty, questionable food, and the very real possibility that you'll die of dysentery long before you ever see combat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wagon lurches to a stop, and you climb down onto soil so dry it produces little puffs of dust with each footfall. It's September 1876, and you've just traveled 300 miles from the nearest railroad terminus to reach Fort Robinson in Nebraska Territory, or maybe it's Fort Laramie in Wyoming, or Fort Sill in Indian Territory. Honestly, they're all variations on the same theme: geometric arrangements of wooden buildings surrounded by walls designed to keep the frontier at bay. The distinction hardly matters when you're this far from anything resembling civilization. The stockade walls rise 12 feet high, constructed from vertical pine logs sharpened to points at the top. Someone, probably a private who annoyed his sergeant, has spent considerable time stripping bark and applying pitch to preserve the wood against the elements. The walls form a rough rectangle, maybe 300 feet on each side, with blockhouses at diagonal corners providing elevated firing positions. It's not exactly impressive architecture, but out here on the plains, where the nearest tree might be 50 miles away, even this represents a monumental lumber investment. The army freighted every single log from distant mountains, a logistical nightmare that explains why so many frontier forts were built near rivers. You notice the main gate stands open. It's not quite sunset, and commerce still trickles in and out. A civilian teamster drives a freight wagon loaded with grain sacks through the entrance, shouting creative profanity at his mules. The guards barely glance at him. They know every supplier by sight in this isolated posting. One guard, a corporal with 3 stripes on his dusty blue wool jacket, does give you a longer look. Fresh meat. Another replacement to fill the ranks depleted by desertion, disease, and the occasional arrow. The timing of your arrival is no accident. The army learned decades ago that moving troops and supplies during the hottest part of the day is an excellent way to lose men to heat stroke. Even now, in early autumn, the afternoon sun has made the journey miserable. Your wool uniform, designed by bureaucrats in Washington who apparently never considered that soldiers might actually wear these things, has left you marinating in your own sweat for hours. But as twilight settles over the prairie, the temperature finally drops into something approaching comfortable. You pass through the gate with a small group of fellow replacements, all of you road-weary and trying not to look as nervous as you feel. The interior of the fort opens up before you in the fading light. Historians still argue whether the standardized fort design pioneered by the Corps of Engineers was brilliant efficiency or stifling bureaucratic inflexibility. But the result is that if you've seen one frontier cavalry post, you've basically seen them all. The parade ground occupies the center, a packed earth square where soldiers drill, formations assemble, and flags get raised and lowered with ceremonial precision. Around this central space, buildings arrange themselves in predictable patterns. To your left stand the enlisted barracks, long rectangular structures with windows spaced at regular intervals. To your right, the stables emit the unmistakable perfume of several dozen horses, and the soldiers assigned to shovel their contributions. Straight ahead, slightly more refined buildings house the officers, their quarters distinguished by actual glass windows rather than the oiled paper that suffices for enlisted men. The sutler's store sits near the gate, positioned to catch traffic entering and leaving. And somewhere out of immediate sight lurks the powder magazine, the fort's most heavily guarded structure for reasons that become obvious the first time you see what happens when black powder ignites uncontrollably. The sky above transitions through shades of orange and purple, the kind of sunset that almost makes you forget you're standing in the middle of nowhere with hostile forces potentially watching from the surrounding hills. Almost. The prairie stretches away in every direction, an ocean of grass rolling toward horizons so distant they seem to curve away from you. A few cottonwood trees cluster along a creek maybe half a mile from the fort, their leaves already showing autumn gold. Beyond that, nothing but grass, sky, and the occasional buffalo herd dark against the landscape. A bugle sounds not the dramatic cavalry charge you might expect, but a mundane administrative call. The guards at the gate begin swinging, the heavy wooden doors closed. The daily ritual that transforms the fort from an open military installation into a locked box. The iron hinges protest with squeals that probably carry for miles across the prairie. You watch as soldiers drop a massive wooden bar across the interior of the gate, securing it until sunrise. The message is clear. Whatever happens out there in the darkness stays out there until morning. Welcome to your new home, soldier. That crooked private grinning at you from the barracks doorway. He's probably already planning which of your possessions he'll steal first. The good news is you'll be too exhausted to care. The corporal who noticed you at the gate now approaches with the unhurried stride of someone who's given this exact tour 100 times before. His name is Maloney, according to the name tape stitched onto his jacket, and he has the weathered face of a man who's spent too many years squinting into prairie sun. "You lot," he says, gesturing at your group of replacements. "Follow me. Try not to get lost, it's a whole 100 yards across." You fall into step behind him as he begins pointing out the fort's anatomy with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grain inventory. The parade ground spreads before you, maybe 200 feet square, its surface packed hard from countless boots marching in formation. During the rainy season, this probably transforms into a mud pit that would swallow a horse, but right now it's concrete hard dirt decorated with scattered patches of stubborn prairie grass that refuse to die despite being trampled daily. Someone's chalked out the boundaries for inspection formations, the white lines already fading in the dust. "Barracks," Maloney announces, jerking his thumb toward the long buildings on the east side. "Enlisted men's quarters. You'll be bunking in Company D, third building down. Each barrack houses about 60 men, give or take whoever's deserted this week." He says this last part without any particular emotion, as if desertion is just another administrative detail, like requisitioning boots. And honestly, out here it might as well be. The army loses something like a third of its frontier soldiers to desertion annually, men who decide that civilian poverty beats military poverty with extra guard duty. The barracks themselves are utilitarian in the extreme wooden structures, about 100 feet long and 25 feet wide, painted in the regulation white that's already peeling in long strips. Each building has a stone chimney at either end, though you'll learn soon enough that those fireplaces are positioned for bureaucratic symmetry rather than effective heating. The bunks closest to the fires will roast, while men at the far ends literally wake up with frost on their blankets come January. Rows of windows line the walls, currently propped open to catch the evening breeze. Historians still argue whether the Army's standardized barrack design represented enlightened concern for soldier health or simply the cheapest construction the Quartermaster Corps could justify, but you're about to spend several years discovering that it's definitely the latter. "Stables there," Maloney continues, pointing south. The cavalry stables run parallel to the barracks, equally long but slightly wider to accommodate the horses that are, let's be honest, more valuable than you are. The Army will spend more on veterinary care for a good cavalry mount than on medical treatment for a dozen privates. Each stable houses about 40 horses, and you can already hear them, the stamping, snorting, and occasional whinny of animals settling in for the night. The smell reaches you even from here, a thick organic funk that you'll eventually stop noticing because it becomes your permanent olfactory baseline. Between the stables and barracks, you spot the laundress's quarters, smaller structures where the enlisted men's wives eke out livings washing uniforms for pennies. It's one of the only ways women can legally remain at frontier posts, and the competition for laundress positions is fierce. These women maintain a social hierarchy as rigid as any officers' club, with the sergeant major's wife lording over the corporal's wives, who in turn keep the privates' wives in their place. Maloney walks you toward the western side of the parade ground, where the buildings get noticeably nicer. "Officers' row," he says with audible disdain. Here the quarters are individual houses rather than communal barracks, each with actual porches and what might generously be called landscaping scraggly bushes that someone attempts to keep alive despite the climate's hostility to anything green. The fort commander's residence sits at the center, distinguished by being slightly larger and having glass in all its windows instead of just some of them. A faint glow of lamplight already shows through those windows, suggesting that officers enjoy the luxury of burning kerosene before full darkness while enlisted men sit in gloom until the last possible moment. That's the adjutant's office. Maloney points to a smaller building adjacent to the commander's quarters, where you'll go for everything from pay complaints to permission to grow a mustache. Not that you'll get either one resolved satisfactorily. Next to it squats the guardhouse, essentially a stone box with barred windows where soldiers who've committed military crimes await punishment. It's rarely empty. Drinking, fighting, insubordination, and falling asleep on guard duty keep a steady rotation of men cycling through its cells. The hospital occupies a building on the northwest corner, identifiable by the medical flag hanging limply in the still evening air. It's staffed by a contract surgeon who probably failed to establish a private practice back east, and a couple of hospital stewards who may or may not have actual medical training. You'll want to avoid becoming a patient here if at all possible. The Army's frontier medicine operates on the principle that whiskey cures most things and amputation handles the rest. Near the north wall, set conspicuously away from everything else, the powder magazine hunkers behind its own protective earthwork berm. It's a stone structure built partly underground, designed so that if something goes catastrophically wrong, the explosion vents upward rather than horizontally through the fort. You can see 2 guards stationed at its entrance even now, because the Army takes its ammunition security seriously. A quirky military regulation actually requires that anyone entering the powder magazine remove their shoes and wear special felt slippers to prevent sparks from boot nails, igniting stray powder grains. It sounds paranoid until you remember that black powder is essentially a bomb waiting for any excuse to explode. Mess Hall. Maloney indicates a building on the south side, positioned between the enlisted barracks and the kitchen structure behind it. The kitchen itself is separate, another precaution against fire spreading to the sleeping quarters. Smoke rises from the kitchen chimney, carrying the less than appetizing scent of whatever passes for tonight's supper. The sutler's store sits near the main gate, a civilian enterprise operating under Army contract. It's where you'll spend most of your pay on overpriced tobacco, canned goods, and writing paper. The sutler, a civilian entrepreneur, holds a monopoly on selling to soldiers and prices accordingly. Think of it as the frontier equivalent of airport retail, except you can't just wait until you get home to shop. Maloney finishes his circuit, bringing you back toward the barracks. "Any questions?" he asks, not really wanting answers. "No? Good. Get yourselves to the sergeant's office. Second door on the right." The layout makes sense now, a self-contained military settlement designed to function independently for months at a time. You climb the 2 wooden steps to the barracks entrance, the boards creaking under your boots in a way that suggests they've supported thousands of similar arrivals. The door stands open, and you step into a narrow hallway that smells like a concentrated essence of unwashed men, gun oil, and tobacco smoke. The sergeant's office occupies a small room immediately to your right, its door also open, revealing a desk nearly buried under papers, ledgers, and what appears to be at least 3 coffee mugs in various states of abandonment. Behind that desk sits First Sergeant William Breckenridge, or at least that's what the nameplate claims. He's somewhere in his 40s, with a magnificent salt and pepper mustache that curves down past his jawline in the style that regulations technically prohibit, but NCOs somehow maintain anyway. His blue wool jacket hangs on a peg behind him, leaving him in his red flannel undershirt with suspenders stretched over what a generous person might call a substantial frame. The man has clearly discovered that the sutler stocks canned condensed milk, and he's been taking full advantage. "Replacements," he says without looking up from whatever he's writing. It's not a question. You and your fellow new arrivals crowd into the doorway, none of you quite sure whether to enter uninvited. Breckenridge finally glances up, his eyes doing a quick assessment that probably tells him everything he needs to know about your futures in the Army. Inside. Don't just stand there like lost cattle. You file in, standing at something approximating attention. The sergeant returns to his paperwork for another 30 seconds, a power move that everyone recognizes but no one challenges. When he finally sets down his pen, he leans back in his chair, which protests with an alarming creak. "I am First Sergeant Breckenridge. I run Company D. The captain commands it, the lieutenants pretend to lead it, but I run it. We clear on that?" You nod along with the others. This is the eternal truth of military service. Officers may give orders, but sergeants make things actually happen. A good first sergeant can make your life tolerable. A bad one can make you pray for a hostile attack just for the variety. Historians still argue whether the Army's reliance on NCO authority represented efficient delegation or systemic officer incompetence. But standing here in this cramped office, you suspect it's mostly because lieutenants fresh from West Point don't know a cavalry horse from a mule. Breckenridge picks up a roster sheet. Names, alphabetical order. You wait your turn as he works through the list, checking names against transfer papers, occasionally grunting what might be approval or might be indigestion. When he reaches you, he barely glances at your paperwork before making a notation. "Previous service?" "No, Sergeant." "Wonderful. Another virgin." He makes another mark. "Can you read and write?" "Yes, Sergeant." This actually produces a flicker of interest. Literacy rates among frontier cavalry enlisted men hover somewhere around 50%, which means the Army's desperately short of men who can handle administrative tasks. Well enough to copy duty rosters? "Yes, Sergeant." "Congratulations. You just volunteered for company clerk duties 3 days a week." He says this like he's bestowing a gift, and in a way, he is. Clerk duty means indoor work, which beats stable mucking and wood chopping. Of course, it also means close proximity to sergeants and their endless paperwork, so there are trade-offs. Breckenridge assigns bunks systematically, consulting a diagram that shows the barracks layout with numbers for each sleeping position. You're assigned to bunk 42, 3rd Squad, 2nd Platoon. You'll report to Corporal Hennessy. He's the red-headed Irishman who looks like he's planning murder. That's just his face mostly. The sergeant makes another notation. "Draw your bedding from the quartermaster tomorrow morning. Tonight you sleep on the bare boards like nature's pillow intended." He moves on to duty assignments, reading from a rotating schedule that seems designed to ensure maximum misery distribution. "You'll pull guard duty every 4th night, stable detail Tuesdays and Fridays, parade ground maintenance Wednesdays, and whatever else needs doing when I feel like assigning it. Questions?" Nobody's foolish enough to have questions. Breckenridge nods, satisfied. Pay is $13 a month for privates. Paid quarterly if the paymaster actually shows up, which he didn't last quarter. So don't spend money you haven't seen yet. He pulls out a different ledger, one with careful columns of debits and credits. Company fund takes 50 cents per month from each man for incidentals, coffee, flour, and the burial fund. Yes, we have a burial fund. It's the frontier. People die. Next. The administrative recitation continues. Laundry arrangements, sick call procedures, the location of the privy trenches, and a warning about the water quality from the creek. Boil it, or suffer the consequences. Breckenridge advises. The surgeon's tired of treating dysentery, and frankly, so am I. We're a cavalry company, not a loose bowel convention. One of your fellow replacements, a kid who can't be more than 18, makes the mistake of asking about leave time. Breckenridge actually laughs, a sound like a rock crusher processing gravel. Leave? Son, the nearest town is 40 miles away, consists of 3 buildings and a deeply optimistic sign that says General Store, and offers nothing you can't get cheaper from the sutler. You want leave, you'll get it when your enlistment ends. In 5 years. He stands, which signals the interview portion of this meeting has concluded. Corporal Maloney will show you to your bunks. Mess call is in 1 hour, that's the bugle that sounds like dying geese. Don't be late. Company of the First Sergeant doesn't tolerate tardiness, sloppiness, or stupidity, though the Army seems committed to supplying me with all 3. He looks directly at you. I'll see you tomorrow morning, Clark, 6 a.m. Don't make me regret noticing you can spell. You file back out into the hallway, where Maloney waits to escort you deeper into the barracks. The sergeant's already returned to his paperwork, his pen scratching across forms that will eventually make their way to some depot quartermaster who probably doesn't care any more than Breckenridge does. The army runs on paperwork, even out here where paperwork seems like the least important thing in the world. But that's frontier military life, equal parts boredom, bureaucracy, and the occasional terror. Corporal Maloney leads you down the main barracks hall, a corridor that runs the entire length of the building with bunks lining both sides. The space is already populated with off-duty soldiers, some lounging on bunks, others hunched over letters, a few playing cards on upturned crates. The noise level hovers somewhere between a busy saloon and a livestock auction. Everyone looks up as you pass, evaluating the new meat with the casual interest of men who've seen countless replacements arrive and disappear. Your assigned bunk turns out to be a wooden frame about 6 feet long and 2 feet wide, stacked 2 high with another directly above it. The previous occupant has left behind absolutely nothing, which probably means he either deserted, died, or was transferred so quickly he couldn't gather his possessions. You choose not to dwell on which option seems most likely. The bunk boards are bare pine, worn smooth by previous sleepers, with gaps between the slats that will definitely let cold air through come winter. Above your bunk, someone's carved Kansas or bust into the support beam, which suggests they either made it to Kansas or the whole bust thing worked out first. Maloney points to a nail driven into the wooden post at the foot of your bunk. That's for your gear, hat, coat, anything you don't want stolen, which is everything. He checks a pocket watch attached to his suspenders by a tarnished chain. Mess call in 30 minutes. Settle in, don't start any fights, and for the love of God, don't touch anyone else's possessions unless you want to learn how creative frontier soldiers get with violence. He leaves you there, and you take stock of your immediate surroundings. The soldier in the bunk across from yours is maybe 30, with a scarred face that suggests he's been in at least one serious disagreement with something sharp. He's cleaning a cavalry pistol with the methodical attention of someone performing a religious ritual. "Fresh fish," he observes without looking up. "You got a name?" You provide it. He nods, still focused on his pistol. "Mackenzie, don't steal my shit. I won't steal yours. We'll get along fine." It's possibly the most welcoming statement anyone's made since you arrived. The bugle sounds across the fort a series of notes that indeed sound like geese in their death throes. Around you, soldiers react with the enthusiasm of men heading to their own executions. Cards get abandoned mid-hand, letters folded mid-sentence, naps interrupted mid-snore. "Mess call?" Mackenzie explains unnecessarily, rising from his bunk and strapping on his pistol belt. "Hope you're not particular about food quality." You join the general migration toward the door, swept along in a current of blue wool and unwashed humanity. The entire company seems to move as one organism, flowing out of the barracks and across the parade ground toward the mess hall. Evening has fully arrived now, the sky darkening from purple to deep blue, and lamps are being lit in the officers' quarters. The enlisted men navigate by twilight and familiarity. The mess hall entrance creates a bottleneck as 60-some men funnel through a door designed for maybe half that traffic. Inside, the building is essentially one large room dominated by 4 long wooden tables with benches on either side. The tables could generously be called rustic, their planks laid across sawhorses, scarred by years of knives, spilled coffee, and the occasional fist fight. At the far end, a serving line has been established, where soldiers shuffle past with tin plates and cups. The smell hits you like a physical force. It's not entirely unpleasant. There's bread baking somewhere, which is promising, but it's mixed with the omnipresent odor of meat that's been salted into something resembling leather and coffee that's been boiling since before you were born. The temperature inside must be 90 degrees, despite the cooling evening air outside, thanks to the kitchen fires and the concentrated body heat of dozens of soldiers. You grab a tin plate from the stack near the entrance. The plates are dented, scratched, and still slightly greasy from their last washing, which probably happened in cold water with minimal soap. The army provides each company with exactly enough plates for the men assigned, meaning these particular pieces of stamped tin have been in continuous service for years. Historians still argue whether the army's decision to use tin rather than ceramic plates represented practical durability concerns or just the absolute cheapest option available, but you're starting to notice a pattern in these debates. The serving line moves with practiced efficiency. First stop: bread. A soldier who's clearly pulled kitchen duty, you can tell by his deeply resentful expression, slaps a chunk of hardtack onto your plate. Hardtack, for the uninitiated, is flour and water baked into something with the consistency of roofing tile. It's technically edible, though that word is doing heavy lifting. The piece you receive has the manufacturer's stamp still visible, BC 1874, which means this particular cracker has been aging gracefully for 2 years. Smart soldiers soak it in coffee to achieve something approaching chewable. Next, salt pork. Another resentful kitchen soldier deposits a slab of meat onto your plate with tongs. The pork has been preserved in so much salt that it probably won't spoil until the end of time itself. It's been boiled to soften it somewhat, but it still has the texture and flexibility of shoe leather. The army purchases this stuff in enormous barrels and feeds it to soldiers with the same enthusiasm you might feed table scraps to a dog. Nutritious? Technically. Delicious? Let's not get carried away. A ladle of beans, actual beans, cooked with some pork fat and maybe an onion if someone felt ambitious, provides the meal's only real vegetable content. They're overcooked to the point of mushiness, but at least they're not actively hostile to your digestive system. Finally, coffee. The soldier manning the coffee pot pours a cup of liquid so dark it might as well be crude oil. The coffee has been boiling for hours. Achieving a concentration that could probably dissolve iron nails if you gave it enough time. You take your cup and find a spot at one of the long tables, wedging yourself between Mackenzie and a thin private who's already halfway through his meal. The actual eating process is less a dining experience and more a fuel intake operation. Nobody talks much, you just work through your plate with the grim determination of men who know this is it until breakfast. The hardtack requires the predicted coffee-soaking treatment, transforming from roofing tile to something merely tooth-threatening. The salt pork is exactly as unpleasant as it looked, requiring aggressive chewing and a strong stomach. The beans, mercifully, go down easily enough. You notice some of the older soldiers have brought their own pepper or hot sauce from the sutler's store. Anything to add flavor to this aggressively bland meal. The whole affair takes maybe 15 minutes. Men finish, drop their plates in a wash barrel by the door, and drift back out into the growing darkness. You follow suit, surrendering your plate to what you're certain is a deeply inadequate cleaning process, and head back across the parade ground. The fort has transformed in full darkness. Lamps glow in various buildings, creating little pools of yellow light, but the parade ground itself is a dark gulf that you navigate by following the shuffle of boots on packed earth. Back in the barracks, the evening's real social life begins. With bellies full, or at least no longer empty, and no duties until tomorrow, the soldiers settle into their personal routines. Lamps are lit along the walls, casting flickering light that creates more shadows than illumination. Someone's gotten a small fire going in the nearest stove despite the temperature, probably more for comfort than warmth. The barracks transforms from a sleeping space into something resembling a working-class social club. If such clubs smelled like feet and featured significantly more weapons. A card game materializes almost immediately at a makeshift table formed by laying a board across 2 footlockers. 5 soldiers crowd around it, playing what looks like poker, with matchsticks standing in for money. Actual cash gambling is technically prohibited, though this particular regulation is enforced with all the rigor of asking nicely and hoping for the best. The players include 2 privates, a corporal, and a pair of older soldiers who have the weathered look of men who've re-enlisted multiple times because civilian life proved even worse than this. 3 queens, one announces, laying down his cards with evident satisfaction. 3 queens and 2 aces are both in my hand, so unless the deck grew extra cards, you're a lying son of a bitch, another responds. The resulting argument over whether someone's cheating or just confused devolves into the kind of good-natured profanity that would make a dock worker blush. Nobody actually throws a punch, they're just establishing the evening's entertainment parameters. Near your bunk, Mackenzie has been joined by 2 other soldiers for a different game entirely. They're playing checkers on a board that someone carved into a flat piece of wood, using buttons and bits of carved bone as pieces. The game proceeds in near silence, each move considered with the seriousness of military strategy, which, out here, might actually be the most tactical thinking these men get to do. Historians still argue whether the Army's frontier period represented a vital training ground for professional soldiers or essentially a warehousing operation for men the nation didn't know what else to do with. But watching checkers played with this intensity suggests the former might be giving things too much credit. Across the aisle, a cluster of soldiers have gathered around a private who's reading aloud from a week-old newspaper that somehow made its way here from Denver. The paper is already falling apart from multiple readings, but it's news from the outside world, and that makes it precious. The private reads in a halting voice that suggests reading isn't his strongest skill. The Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia continues to draw crowds, numbering in the thousands daily. He stumbles over exposition but soldiers it through. The listeners absorb these details of the world beyond the fort with the attention of men starved for any connection to civilization. Letter writing occupies several soldiers scattered throughout the barracks. They hunch over their bunks or use their knees as writing surfaces, scratching out messages to wives, mothers, sweethearts, or in one case, what sounds like a very formal complaint to a congressman about army pay. The latter seems optimistic to the point of delusion, but you have to admire the ambition. Writing materials are personal property, purchased from the sutler at prices that would make stationery stores back east weep with envy. A sheet of paper and an envelope might cost you a day's pay. One soldier near the far end of the barracks has produced a harmonica and begins working through a melancholy tune that might be Lorena, or might be something he's making up. The music is surprisingly competent, suggesting actual practice rather than just random noise. A few men hum along, others tell him to shut up, but without real heat, the music is at least different from the usual evening soundtrack of snoring, arguing, and the occasional fart that could register on the Richter scale. The storytelling begins organically, as it always does when you put soldiers together with nothing else to do. An older private named Sullivan, identifiable by his impressive collection of facial scars, launches into what is clearly a well-rehearsed tale about fighting Comanches in Texas back in '68. "So there I am," he begins, holding a position with nothing but my rifle and my devastating good looks. The story grows more elaborate with each telling, you suspect, but nobody cares. Entertainment value trumps factual accuracy. Another soldier counters with his own story about a bear that wandered into camp and stole an entire pot of stew. Then someone else tops that with a tale about a trooper who got drunk and proposed marriage to a cavalry horse. Each story escalates the absurdity, and you're pretty sure at least 70% of what you're hearing is pure fabrication. But that's frontier barracks. Life reality is negotiable. Mackenzie looks up from his checker game and catches your eye. "You got any money on you? Real money, not promises?" You nod, patting the pocket where you've stashed the few dollars you managed to hold on to during your journey west. "Good, come on." He stands, abandoning his game to the evident relief of his opponent, who was losing badly. "Let's introduce you to the sutler before all the good tobacco's gone." And I use the term good loosely. You follow him back out into the night. The parade ground is nearly invisible now, just a dark space defined by the scattered lights around its perimeter. A few soldiers move between buildings like ghosts, their boots scuffing in the dust. The sutler's store glows invitingly near the main gate, lamplight spilling from its windows and open door. It's clearly doing brisk business. You can hear voices and laughter from here. The sutler's establishment is essentially a frontier general store granted monopoly rights to sell to soldiers. The building is about 30 feet square, wood-framed like everything else, but with slightly better construction quality since the sutler, being a civilian contractor, actually had to pay for it himself. Above the door hangs a hand-painted sign, J. Patterson, Sutler, Fair Prices. The last part is either optimistic or satirical depending on your perspective. You step inside and immediately understand why soldiers flock here despite the prices. After months or years of institutional sameness, regulation, uniforms, standardized meals, identical barracks, the sutler's store represents choice, variety, and the faint memory of civilian life. The space is crammed with goods arranged on shelves, hanging from hooks and stacked in corners. The smell is equally crowded: tobacco, coffee, leather, soap, canned goods, and the indefinable scent of commerce. Behind the counter stands J. Patterson himself, a stout man in his 50s with mutton chop whiskers and a vest straining against his considerable midsection. He's serving a corporal while simultaneously keeping an eye on every other customer in the store, a skill developed through years of dealing with soldiers who view shoplifting as a legitimate hobby. "Help you, gentlemen?" he calls to you and Mackenzie, without actually looking away from his current transaction. Mackenzie heads straight for the tobacco display, leaving you to wander and gawk. The shelves reveal the sutler's markup strategy with brutal clarity. A can of peaches, the kind that costs maybe 15 cents in a regular store back east, is priced at 75 cents. A bar of actual soap, not the harsh lye soap the army issues, runs 50 cents. A tin of sardines commands 40 cents. Everything is priced at roughly 3 to 5 times its normal value, and you can't do a damn thing about it because Patterson holds the monopoly on selling to soldiers within fort boundaries. The system is brilliantly exploitative, really. Historians still argue whether sutler monopolies represented necessary incentives for civilian contractors to service isolated military posts or constituted legalized price gouging, but standing here looking at a $1.50 candy stick, you're leaning heavily toward the latter interpretation. The army sets maximum prices the sutler can charge, but those maximums are so generous that Patterson probably lights his cigars with dollar bills. You spot the tobacco selection Mackenzie's examining: plug tobacco, loose tobacco, cigars of varying quality, and cigarette papers for soldiers who roll their own. The prices range from reasonable to absurd depending on quality. A plug of cheap tobacco might cost 20 cents, while a decent cigar could set you back a full day's pay. Mackenzie selects a middle-grade plug and heads to the counter. While you're browsing, you notice the sutler also stocks items that the army should be providing but somehow never does in sufficient quantity. Writing paper and envelopes occupy an entire shelf, priced to extract maximum profit from lovesick soldiers. Sewing supplies, needles, thread, buttons are available for men who need to repair uniforms and can't wait for the quarterly quartermaster shipment. Playing cards, dice, and other entertainment items fill another section, all priced like luxury goods. A quirky detail catches your attention. Patterson stocks what he calls Indian remedies, bottles of patent medicine, claiming to cure everything from rheumatism to melancholy, using secret formulas supposedly learned from native tribes. The labels feature dramatic illustrations of noble chiefs sharing ancient wisdom with grateful white settlers. The actual contents are probably mostly alcohol with some herbs thrown in for plausibility. One bottle promises to cure the army complaint, which you suspect refers to dysentery but could honestly mean any of a dozen service-related ailments. It costs $1, which seems like a lot to pay for what's essentially whiskey with delusions of grandeur. The store also features a small lending library books that soldiers can borrow for a weekly fee. The selection runs heavily toward dime novels and sensationalized adventure stories, the kind of lurid fiction that depicts frontier life as significantly more exciting than the reality of guard duty and stable mucking. You spot titles like Deadwood Dick's Doom and Wild Bill's Last Trail, each promising death-defying heroics that bear no resemblance to actual cavalry service. Patterson probably makes more from these lending fees than from some of his merchandise. Near the counter, a glass case displays the premium items: pocket watches, knives with bone handles, silver-plated flasks, and other goods aimed at soldiers with actual money. A corporal's stripes might earn you an extra $4 a month, and sergeants make significantly more enough to afford occasional luxuries. The watches in particular catch your eye, ranging from cheap tin affairs to genuinely nice timepieces that probably cost more than a private makes in 6 months. Mackenzie completes his tobacco purchase and jerks his head toward the door. Come on, unless you're planning to mortgage your future for some peaches. You select a small bar of soap, 50 cents, that will hurt your finances but help your hygiene, and approach the counter. Patterson takes your money with the practiced efficiency of a man who separated thousands of soldiers from their pay. The soap goes into a small paper wrapper, which he hands over with the same solemnity you'd expect for a much more significant transaction. "Don't let anyone see you with that," he advises. "Good soap has a way of walking off on its own around here." You and Mackenzie step back into the darkness, navigating by memory and the faint light from various buildings. The barracks loom ahead, still noisy with the evening's activities. Back inside, the temperature has dropped noticeably. The single stove barely makes a dent in heating a space this large, and soldiers have started pulling on extra layers against the chill. Autumn nights on the prairie don't mess around. Your bunk looks exactly as unwelcoming as it did earlier, bare boards, offering all the comfort of sleeping on a park bench. Mackenzie, observing your predicament, points to a corner where canvas bags are piled. "Straw ticks," he explains. "Government issue. Fill one from the stable and you've got yourself a mattress." Well, mattress is a generous term, but it beats naked wood. You grab one of the canvas sacks and head back outside, this time toward the stables. The cavalry mounts are settling in for the night, their movements creating gentle sounds in the darkness. A lantern hangs near the entrance, where a soldier pulls night stable watch, his job being to ensure none of the horses decide to die inconveniently or get stolen by raiders with exceptional timing. He nods at your canvas tick. "Straw piles in the back. Don't take the fresh stuff officers' horses get that. Use the older pile on the left." The straw smells like concentrated horse barn, not entirely unpleasant, but definitely organic. You stuff your canvas tick with armloads of the stuff, packing it until the bag achieves something resembling firmness. The process leaves you covered in chaff and dust, but you now possess a mattress of sorts. It's lumpy, it probably contains bugs, and it'll flatten within a week, but it's a definite improvement over boards. Historians still argue whether the Army's provision of straw ticks represented concern for soldier comfort or simply the absolute minimum required to prevent mass desertion from backache, but you're too tired to care about the distinction. Back at your bunk, you wrestle the tick onto the wooden slats, discovering that it doesn't quite fit perfectly and has a tendency to slide around. You'll learn to wedge it in place with your rolled uniform coat. For now, you arrange it as best you can and take stock of your possessions. Everything you own currently fits in a single canvas bag. One extra shirt, one pair of socks with holes you keep meaning to darn, a razor you'll need tomorrow, a tin cup that's seen better days, and the soap you just purchased. Oh, and your military equipment, which the Army cares about significantly more than your personal belongings. The military gear requires proper attention. Your rifle, a Springfield Model 1873 trapdoor carbine, leans against the bunk frame where Mackenzie showed you to place it. The weapon is your responsibility in a way that transcends mere ownership. If this rifle malfunctions, gets damaged, or heaven forbid goes missing, you'll face consequences ranging from pay docking to court-martial, depending on severity. You give it a quick inspection, checking that the breech operates smoothly and the barrel is clean. The Springfield is a single-shot rifle that loads by flipping up a hinged breech block, hence trapdoor, to insert a 45 to 70 cartridge. It's reliable, reasonably accurate, and utterly obsolete compared to the repeating rifles that civilians and hostile forces increasingly carry. But the Army bought approximately 500,000 of them and isn't about to admit that mistake. Your cartridge belt hangs on the peg with 20 rounds in the loops. You count them, a habit that will become automatic and ensure each round is seated properly. The brass cartridges gleam dully in the lamplight, each one containing enough powder and lead to end someone's life at considerable distance. The weight of that responsibility doesn't quite hit you yet, but it will. The cavalry saber, that mostly useless remnant of Napoleonic warfare, rests in its scabbard beside your bunk. The Army maintains romantic notions about cavalry charges with flashing sabers, despite overwhelming evidence that such tactics mostly result in dead cavalrymen and confused horses. Still, regulations require you to maintain the thing, so you pull it partially from the scabbard to check for rust. The blade is reasonably clean. Your predecessor at least maintained basic care standards before whatever fate removed him from this bunk. Around you, other soldiers are conducting similar equipment checks or ignoring them entirely, depending on their relationship with military discipline. A private across the aisle is meticulously cleaning his pistol for the second time today, breaking it down into components and wiping each piece with an oiled rag. His neighbor is using his rifle as a coat rack, which would give any sergeant a conniption fit. The range of care standards suggests that enforcement of equipment maintenance regulations varies considerably depending on which NCO catches you. The bugle sounds again, a different call this time, slower and somehow sadder. Tattoo. Mackenzie informs you from his bunk where he's removed his boots and is examining a hole in his sock with evident displeasure. Lights out in 15 minutes. Get yourself sorted. 15 minutes to prepare for sleep in a room with 60 other men, most of whom have different ideas about appropriate bedtime behavior. You're in the process of unlacing your boots, a surprisingly complex operation after a day of walking in wool socks that have essentially fused to your feet when Corporal Hennessy appears at the end of your bunk. He's the red-headed Irishman Sergeant Breckenridge mentioned, and the murder-planning expression is indeed just his natural face. You, new fish, guard duty, third watch rotation. Get your rifle. So much for sleep. You relace your boots while Hennessy waits with the patience of a man who's delivered this exact news to countless disappointed soldiers. But I just got here. You start to protest. Congratulations on your excellent timing. The duty roster doesn't care about your arrival schedule. He consults a slip of paper. You're on the west wall, position 4. Report to Sergeant Daniels at the guardhouse in 5 minutes. Do not be late, do not forget ammunition, do not shoot anything unless it's actually threatening the fort. You grab your rifle, check that your cartridge belt is properly fastened, and follow Hennessy out into the night for the second time this evening. The parade ground has emptied considerably, most soldiers are in their bunks, and the lights in the officers' quarters are winking out one by one. Only the guardhouse shows sustained activity, a lamp burning in its window and 2 soldiers visible outside. Sergeant Daniels turns out to be a scarecrow of a man in his 30s, with a magnificent handlebar moustache and the tired eyes of someone who's overseen guard rotations for far too long. He stands outside the guardhouse with a clipboard, checking names against his roster as soldiers report. 4 other men are already assembled, your fellow unfortunates drawing night watch. Daniels looks you over without enthusiasm. Fresh replacement? Yes, Sergeant. Wonderful. You know how to point a rifle and not fall asleep? Yes, Sergeant. Then you're already exceeding my expectations. He makes a mark on his clipboard. You'll be on the west wall, firing platform 4, 4-hour watch starting at 2,200 hours. That's 10 p.m. for those of you who can't tell time by a bugle. You'll be relieved at 0200. Do not abandon your post. Do not discharge your weapon unless you have a legitimate target. Do not fall asleep. Questions? Nobody has questions, or at least nobody wants to admit confusion in front of Daniels, who seems like the type to remember such admissions permanently. He leads your group toward the western wall, explaining the basics as you walk. Each firing platform holds 2 men. Your partner tonight is Private Kowalski, who's been here long enough to know what he's doing. Listen to him. If you see something, report it. If you're not sure you saw something, report it anyway. Better to have 10 false alarms than miss 1 actual threat. The west wall looms against the night sky, a solid barrier between the fort and whatever lurks in the prairie darkness. A wooden ladder leans against the wall at regular intervals, providing access to the firing platforms built along the interior. These platforms are essentially wooden walkways about 6 feet below the top of the stockade, wide enough for 2 men to stand side by side and elevated enough to see over the sharpened points at the wall's crest. You climb the ladder behind Daniels, your rifle slung across your back and your boots finding purchase on rungs worn smooth by countless guard details. The platform creaks under your weight. Everything wooden in this fort creaks, suggesting either poor construction or atmospheric conditions that dry out lumber to the point of constant complaint. Historians still argue whether frontier fort construction standards represented adequate military engineering, or just whatever could be built quickly with available materials. But climbing this ladder in the dark, you're not feeling particularly confident about structural integrity. Private Kowalski is already at position 4, leaning against the wall and looking terminally bored. He's a stocky man, maybe 25, with a thick Polish accent and the relaxed posture of someone who's stood this exact watch 100 times before. Fresh meat? He observes as you clamber onto the platform. You know which end of rifle makes the bang? I've got the general concept. Then we probably won't die tonight. Probably. Kowalski grins, revealing a missing tooth. Sergeant Daniels, this one seems smarter than the last replacement you sent me. The last replacement fell off the platform, Daniels replies dryly. So the bar is low. He points into the darkness beyond the wall. Your sector runs from that cottonwood tree. You can just barely see it against the stars to the creek bend about 300 yards out. Watch for movement, listen for unusual sounds, and remember that most of what you'll see and hear is completely harmless wildlife that will nonetheless make you want to shoot it. Do not shoot the wildlife. We need the ammunition for actual threats. With that cheerful guidance, Daniels descends the ladder, leaving you alone with Kowalski and the vast prairie night. Your platform is about 12 feet long and 4 feet wide, with a wooden railing on the interior side to prevent accidental falls. The exterior side is open to the top of the stockade wall, which comes up to roughly chest height. Firing ports have been cut into the wall at regular intervals, gaps about 6 inches wide, that allow you to observe the outside world without exposing your entire body to potential incoming fire. Kowalski settles back against the wall, his rifle cradled in the crook of his arm with the casual familiarity of a man holding a familiar tool. First watch on the frontier? He asks, though he clearly knows the answer. That obvious? You're standing like someone expecting attack any second. Relax. Most nights nothing happens except you get cold, bored, and develop deep philosophical thoughts about why you enlisted. He pulls a plug of tobacco from his pocket and bites off a chunk. You chew. You decline. And Kowalski shrugs, working the tobacco into his cheek. For a few minutes, you both stand there in silence, your eyes adjusting to the darkness. The fort behind you still glows with scattered lamplight, but ahead, the prairie stretches away into absolute blackness broken only by stars. The Milky Way sprawls across the sky with a clarity impossible to achieve anywhere near civilization, a river of light so dense it almost seems artificial. Then the sounds begin to register. The wind comes first, constant, patient, endless wind that sweeps across thousands of miles of open grassland without encountering any serious obstacles until it hits the fort's stockade wall. It makes the prairie grass whisper and hiss like a living thing, creating layers of sound that rise and fall in waves. Historians still argue whether the psychological effects of frontier isolation resulted primarily from the loneliness or from sensory phenomena, like this constant wind. But standing here, you suspect the wind does most of the work. It's unnerving in a way that's hard to articulate, just constant enough to become background noise, just variable enough to never let you completely tune it out. Wait for it, Kowalski says quietly. You wait, not sure what you're waiting for. Then you hear it, a high, yipping call that starts as a single voice and suddenly multiplies into a chorus of yelps, howls, and barks that seem to come from everywhere at once. Coyotes. A pack of them out there in the darkness, communicating in their eerie language that sounds disturbingly like human laughter mixed with screaming. First time hearing coyotes, you think it's Indians, Kowalski observes. Second time, you think it's demons. Third time, you realize it's just those scrawny bastards arguing about who gets to eat whatever they killed. He spits tobacco juice over the wall. They won't come near the fort. Too smart. But they'll sing you songs all night if the mood strikes them. The coyote chorus continues for another minute, a wavering wall of sound that makes your skin prickle despite Kowalski's reassurance. Then it cuts off abruptly, leaving silence that seems somehow louder than the noise. You grip your rifle a little tighter, and Kowalski chuckles. Told you. Now, you're wondering what made them stop, right? Probably nothing. Probably they just got bored. Or maybe a wolf wandered by. Or maybe, he pauses for effect, something else. You're not helping. Entertainment is where you find it on guard duty. The night settles back into its pattern of wind and grass whisper, and you begin to distinguish other sounds. There's the creek, barely audible from this distance, making the gentle water over rocks murmur that would be soothing in any other context. Somewhere much closer, a horse snorts in the stables, probably reacting to the coyotes or just shifting in sleep. From the barracks comes a faint sound that might be snoring or might be someone's dying breath. Honestly, some of these soldiers sound like they're wrestling bears in their sleep. An owl calls from the cottonwood trees, that classic hoo-hoo that sounds fake precisely because it's so stereotypically owl-like. Another owl answers from a different direction, and you hear wing beats as one of them takes flight. Night hunters doing their work while you stand here doing yours. There's something almost companionable about that thought. See that? Kowalski points into the darkness. You stare in the indicated direction, seeing absolutely nothing. No. Exactly. That's what you'll see about 95% of the time. Nothing. Your eyes will start playing tricks after an hour or so. You'll see movement where there isn't any. Shapes that don't exist. Indians who turn out to be bushes. He shifts his weight, settling into what looks like a more comfortable lean. A quirky fact for you, some forts started putting white paint on rocks near the perimeter so guards would have reference points. Stops you from hallucinating quite as much when you've got actual objects to focus on. This fort didn't bother with that luxury, so enjoy your entertainment. Something rustles in the grass much closer than you'd like, maybe 30 yards from the wall. Your hand tightens on your rifle instinctively. Kowalski doesn't even turn his head. Rabbit, he says with absolute certainty. Maybe a prairie dog if it's feeling adventurous. You can tell by how it moves, quick little sounds with pauses. Anything bigger moves different. How can you tell in pitch darkness? 3 years of standing on this exact platform listening to every damn thing that moves out there. You develop an ear for it, or you spend every night jumping at shadows. He finally glances at you. You'll learn. Give it a month, and you'll be able to identify individual coyotes by their howls. Give it 6 months, and you'll be so bored you'll name them. You and Kowalski settle into the rhythm of the watch, which mostly involves standing quietly and periodically scanning the darkness for threats that statistically will never materialize. Your eyes have adjusted enough now that you can make out the vague shapes of terrain, the darker line that marks the creek bed, the clustered shadows of cottonwood trees, the undulating prairie grass that looks like a frozen ocean in the starlight. Behind you, the fort has largely gone dark. Most of the barracks' windows no longer show lamplight, suggesting your fellow soldiers have achieved sleep, or at least a reasonable facsimile thereof. The stable lantern still burns that stays lit all night for the watch rotation. But what catches your attention is the persistent glow from officers' row across the parade ground. While enlisted men sleep in darkness or pay for their own candles, the officers' quarters maintain their illumination well into the night. Kowalski notices your attention. Nice, isn't it? How the other half lives. He gestures with his chin toward the largest building, the commander's quarters at the center of officers' row. Golden lamplight spills from 2 windows on the ground floor, and you can see what appears to be a chandelier, an actual chandelier, casting shadows on the ceiling. Captain Morrison, good officer as officers go, brought his wife and daughter out here, which is either brave or insane depending on your perspective. From this elevated position on the firing platform, you have an oddly intimate view into the lives of the fort's command structure. It's not intentional voyeurism, the officers simply don't expect enlisted men to be standing above them looking down, but you can't help observing the contrast. Through the commander's window, you glimpse what appears to be a dining room with actual furniture. Not rough-hewn benches and plank tables, but chairs with backs and a table that probably doesn't have fighting scars carved into its surface. See that bookcase? Kowalski points to another illuminated window, likely the commander's study. Even from this distance and angle, you can make out shelves lined with books, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Officers read, he says with the tone of someone describing an exotic foreign custom. They've got entire libraries, while we're lucky if someone can read a newspaper out loud without stumbling over the big words. The observation isn't entirely fair. Plenty of enlisted men can read perfectly well, including you, but the broader point stands. Army officers, particularly at frontier posts, often brought extensive personal libraries because books were one of the few entertainments available that didn't involve alcohol, gambling, or the very limited social options the wilderness provided. Historians still argue whether the officer corps' emphasis on education and literacy represented professional military standards or simply class-based gatekeeping, but the practical effect was that officers occupied an entirely different intellectual universe than the men they commanded. Movement in the commander's window draws your eye. A woman passes through the lamplight, presumably Mrs. Morrison, carrying what looks like needlework. She settles into a chair near the window, and you can see her head bend over her stitching. The domestic normalcy of the scene is jarring against the backdrop of frontier isolation. While you stand on a wall with a loaded rifle watching for threats, she's doing embroidery or whatever it is officers' wives do with needle and thread. The daughter's about 16, Kowalski mentions. Pretty girl, off limits in about 40 different ways, so don't even think about it. Last private who got caught staring too long spent a month in the guardhouse. He spits tobacco juice again. Officers' families are basically a separate species out here. They have dances, tea parties, musicals, stuff that might as well be happening on the moon for all the relevance it has to our lives. In the next building over, another window shows a single lamp burning in what's probably a bachelor officer's quarters. You can see the silhouette of a man at a desk, writing something. Reports, probably. Officers generate paperwork the way coyotes generate howls, constantly and with questionable purpose. Every patrol requires a written report. Every supply requisition demands documentation. Every disciplinary action needs a formal record. The army runs on paper, and officers are the ones who keep the machine fed. Lieutenant Harper. Kowalski identifies the silhouette. Fresh from West Point about 6 months ago. Still thinks cavalry charges with sabers drawn are a viable tactical option. There's genuine affection in his mockery. He'll learn, or he'll get himself killed leading a suicidal charge. Either way, the problem solves itself. The contrast between officer and enlisted accommodations is impossible to ignore from this vantage point. The officers' quarters are individual houses, or at least semi-detached units, each with multiple rooms, real windows with actual glass, front porches, and in some cases attempts at landscaping. Inside, they have furniture shipped from the east, carpets to cover wooden floors, stoves that probably work efficiently, and privacy. Meanwhile, 60 enlisted men share a single barracks room with all the privacy of a cattle pen and furniture that consists entirely of bunks and whatever footlockers they could scrounge. A quirky detail of frontier officer life. Many brought pianos to their quarters, massive instruments that required extraordinary effort to transport across hundreds of miles of rough terrain. A quirky detail of frontier officer life. Many brought pianos to their quarters, massive instruments that required extraordinary effort to transport across hundreds of miles of rough terrain. The commander's wife sometimes plays on Sunday evenings, and if the wind is right, you can hear the faint strains of classical music drifting across the parade ground, a surreal soundtrack to standing guard with a rifle in the wilderness. Your contemplation of officer privilege is interrupted by a sound from the stables below and to your right. It's not alarming exactly, just different, a horse making a noise that stands out from the usual nighttime stable sounds. Kowalski hears it too. Horses are restless, he observes. Probably smelled a coyote getting too close, or maybe one of them is colicking. Either way, stable watch will handle it. But the sound continues, and after a moment Kowalski straightens from his casual lean. Actually, go check on that. Standing orders say guard detail assists stable watch if something seems off with the horses. He waves you toward the ladder. Don't worry, I won't let the Sioux overrun the fort while you're gone. You descend the ladder carefully. It's significantly trickier in the dark than it was climbing up and cross the short distance to the stables. The building is long and low, designed to house roughly 40 cavalry mounts in individual stalls along both sides of a central aisle. The stable watch, a private you haven't met yet, sits on a stool near the entrance with a lantern beside him and a book open on his lap. He looks up as you approach. Problem? Kowalski sent me to check. Heard something odd. The private his name tape reads Chen, which is unusual enough that you file it away stands and grabs the lantern. Third time tonight. Something's got them spooked. He leads you into the stable, and immediately you're enveloped in horse smell, manure, hay, leather, and the warm animal scent of the horses themselves. It's not unpleasant once you acclimate to it, just overwhelming in its concentration. The horses shift and snort as you pass, their eyes reflecting the lantern light with an eerie glow. Each stall holds a single mount, most of them standing three-legged in that relaxed way horses sleep without lying down. But about halfway down the row, you find the source of the disturbance, a bay gelding pacing in his stall, ears pinned back, clearly agitated about something. "That's Winchester," Chen says, stopping at the stall. "Captain Morrison's personal mount. High-strung bastard." He reaches over the stall door to pat the horse's neck, speaking in soothing tones. "Easy, boy. Nothing's coming to eat you tonight." Winchester allows the attention but doesn't settle, his hooves continuing to shift restlessly in the straw bedding. Chen examines him with practiced efficiency, running hands down the horse's legs, checking for swelling, looking at his belly for signs of distress, checking his water bucket. Nothing obviously wrong. He's just nervous. He glances at you. Horses are better early warning systems than most guards. If they're all acting up, there's usually a reason. You look down the row of stalls and realize several other horses are also more alert than they should be at this hour. Ears forward, heads raised, attention focused on something beyond the stable walls. It's subtle enough that you might not notice if Chen hadn't pointed it out, but once you see it, the pattern is clear. Something out in the night has their attention. Could be a wolf pack passing through, Chen suggests, though he doesn't sound entirely convinced. Or maybe a grizzly down from the mountains. Had one wander through last spring, horses were beside themselves for 3 days until it moved on. He gives Winchester a final pat. "Keep an eye out up there. If it's something serious, the horses will tell us before we see it." The responsibility weighing on these animals suddenly becomes apparent. Each cavalry horse represents an investment of roughly $150 more than a year's pay for a private plus months of training to accept gunfire, bugle calls, and the general chaos of military service. Lose a horse to theft, injury, or disease, and the entire cavalry company's operational capacity diminishes. Historians still argue whether the Army's emphasis on horse care exceeded its concern for soldier welfare, out of genuine tactical necessity or institutional misplaced priorities. But the practical reality is that these animals receive better medical care, better food, and more consistent shelter than the men who ride them. Chen walks you down the rest of the stable row, pointing out the hierarchy even among horses. "This one's the colonel's spare mount. That one belongs to Lieutenant Harper. See how it's smaller? Harper's a light rider. Doesn't need a big cavalry charger." He stops at a stall holding a particularly magnificent chestnut. "And this beauty is Sergeant Major's personal horse. Best trained mount in the entire fort. Could probably run a patrol without a rider if you pointed her in the right direction." The threat of horse theft is constant and catastrophic out here. Native raiding parties specifically target horses because they know cavalry without mounts is just infantry with identity issues. A successful raid that steals even a dozen horses can cripple a fort's ability to patrol, pursue, or respond to threats. The Army counters this with multiple layers of security. Stable watch rotates every 4 hours, multiple guards patrol the perimeter, and orders specify that any suspicious activity near the stables justifies raising a full alarm. You thank Chen and head back to your position on the wall, climbing the ladder with the horse's nervous energy still fresh in your mind. Kowalski listens to your report with the attentiveness of someone who knows that small details can mean the difference between a quiet night and a very exciting one. "Horses spooked, but nothing specific," he summarizes. "Could be anything, could be nothing. We'll keep our eyes open." The night deepens around you, the temperature continuing its steady drop. You're grateful for your wool uniform now, despite how much you cursed it during the day. The wind has picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of the prairie dried grass, dust, and that indefinable smell of vast open spaces that exists nowhere else. Your watch continues in relative silence, punctuated by Kowalski's occasional observations about nothing in particular and the ongoing symphony of prairie night sounds. Around midnight, Sergeant Daniels makes his rounds, climbing the ladder to check on each guard position. He appears on your platform with the silent efficiency of someone who's done this 1,000 times. "Status? Quiet, Sergeant," Kowalski reports. Horses were restless earlier, nothing since. Daniels nods, his face barely visible in the darkness. Keep alert. Change of guard rotation in 2 hours. He turns to you. How are you holding up, new fish? Still awake, Sergeant. Remarkable. The last replacement fell asleep his first night and nearly got himself shot when I poked him to wake him up. He thought I was a hostile and came up swinging. Daniels adjusts his rifle strap. Speaking of which, I need someone to walk the interior perimeter and check in with the powder magazine guards. Kowalski, you're more experienced, you take it. New Fish holds the platform solo for 15 minutes. Try not to start a war while he's gone. Kowalski descends the ladder, leaving you genuinely alone on the firing platform for the first time tonight. The responsibility settles over you like a physical weight. This section of wall, your section now, is your sole concern. Anything that happens here is on you. You grip your rifle tighter and focus on the darkness beyond the stockade, your ears straining for any sound that doesn't fit the established pattern of wind and wildlife. Minutes pass with excruciating slowness when you're hyper-alert and alone. Every sound demands investigation. Every shadow needs examination. Every shift in the wind carries potential threat. You're beginning to understand how soldiers shoot at phantoms and raise false alarms. The darkness and isolation do strange things to perception and judgment. That bush out there definitely moved. Or maybe it didn't. Hard to tell. The one next to it? Also suspicious. You're probably fine. Probably. Kowalski returns within the promised 15 minutes, climbing back onto the platform with the casual competence of someone who could do this in his sleep. Still here, fort still standing. I'm impressed. He resumes his position against the wall. Powder magazine guards are bored but alert. Which is exactly how you want powder magazine guards, bored enough to not be trigger happy, alert enough to actually be guarding. The mention of the powder magazine reminds you that you haven't actually seen it up close yet, despite Corporal Maloney's initial tour pointing it out from a distance. It occupies a position on the north side of the fort, set deliberately away from other structures behind its protective earthwork berm. Even in darkness, you can make out its squat silhouette and the faint glow of the guard's lantern. The magazine is probably the most important building in the entire fort, Kowalski says, following your gaze. Lose the barracks in a fire? Inconvenient. Lose the stables? Catastrophic. Lose the powder magazine? We're all dead, or might as well be. He shifts his tobacco to the other cheek. No ammunition means no defense, no hunting, no survival. We'd be a stockade full of men with expensive clubs pretending they're rifles. The Army's frontier powder magazines follow strict engineering specifications designed by people who've seen what happens when ammunition storage goes wrong. The structure itself is built of stone rather than wood, fire-resistant and sturdy enough to contain minor explosions. It's set partially underground, with walls 3 feet thick and a roof designed to blow upward rather than outward if the worst happens. Dirt berms surround it on 3 sides, creating blast deflection that theoretically protects the rest of the fort. Historians still argue whether these safety measures represented genuine engineering expertise or just very expensive, hopeful thinking, but at least someone thought about the problem. Inside that stone bunker sits the fort's entire ammunition supply. Thousands of rounds for the Springfield rifles, cartridges for the cavalry pistols, shotgun shells for hunting details, and the black powder itself stored in sealed barrels. Black powder is notoriously unstable stuff. Moisture makes it useless, sparks make it explosive, and improper storage makes it gradually decompose into components even more dangerous than the original mixture. The magazine is kept scrupulously dry, with strict regulations about who can enter, when, and under what conditions. The alarm comes without warning, shattering the night's monotony with shocking abruptness. One moment you're standing there half hypnotized by darkness and prairie sounds. The next moment a rifle shot cracks from the south wall, the universal signal that something's wrong. The shot echoes across the fort and the prairie beyond, a sharp punctuation that makes your heart jump even though you were supposedly alert. "Here we go," Kowalski mutters, suddenly much more upright and focused. Within seconds, a bugle blares from the direction of the guardhouse, the assembly call, harsh and urgent. Below you, the fort transforms from sleeping settlement to organized chaos with remarkable speed. Lamps flare to life in the barracks, doors bang open. You hear the thunder of boots as soldiers pour out onto the parade ground, most of them still fumbling with buttons and straps, some clearly disoriented from being ripped out of sleep. "Stay at your post," Kowalski commands, unnecessarily since you have no idea what else you'd do. He leans over the wall, trying to see toward the south side where the original shot came from. "Can't see shit from here. Probably nothing. Probably cattle that wandered too close. But standing orders say, treat every alarm like it's the real thing until proven otherwise." Down on the parade ground, Sergeant Breckenridge emerges from the barracks, already bellowing orders, somehow fully dressed, despite having presumably been asleep seconds ago. "Company D, form up. Look alive, you slack-jawed degenerates." The soldiers scramble into formation lines with varying degrees of success, the newer men bumping into each other while the veterans find their positions through muscle memory. Count off. The count proceeds down the line, each man shouting his number. You catch yourself almost shouting from up here before remembering you're already on duty and therefore exempt from formation. The whole process takes maybe 3 minutes from alarm to organized company formation, not bad for men who were mostly unconscious moments ago. Historians still argue whether the Army's emphasis on rapid assembly drills represented practical preparedness or just another excuse to torment soldiers with midnight exercises, but watching this efficiency in action, you have to admit the training works. Officers emerge from their quarters with considerably more dignity but equal speed. Captain Morrison appears on his porch already in full uniform, which seems physically impossible given the timeline. Either he sleeps in his dress blues, or he has a magic changing routine that defies physics. Lieutenant Harper runs across the parade ground from the bachelor officers' quarters, still buckling his sword belt and looking substantially less composed than his commander. "Second platoon, south wall." Breckenridge roars. "First platoon, secure the gate. Third platoon, reserve in the center. Move with purpose, not panic." The soldiers break from formation and flow toward their assigned positions with the controlled urgency of men who've drilled this response repeatedly. The fort's defensive plan is activating exactly as designed: perimeter security reinforced, gate secured, reserves positioned to respond wherever needed. From your position on the west wall, you watch soldiers scramble up ladders onto the south wall firing platforms. Their silhouettes appear along the stockade wall, rifles ready, creating a defensive line that would make any attacking force seriously reconsider their life choices. Of course, there's almost certainly no attacking force, but that's not the point. The point is responding as if there might be. Sergeant Daniels appears at the base of your ladder, climbing up quickly despite carrying a lantern. "What's your sector status?" he demands of Kowalski. "Clear, Sergeant. Nothing moving on the west approach. Horses are calm. Keep it that way." Daniels peers into the darkness beyond the wall, then back toward the south where the alarm originated. Probably nothing. Probably Private Henderson getting jumpy and shooting at shadows again. But we treat it like the real thing until someone confirms it's Henderson being an idiot. A runner, one of the junior privates, sprints across the parade ground and reports breathlessly to Captain Morrison. Even from this distance, you can hear the captain's response. "Cattle? He shot at cattle?" There's a long pause filled with what you imagine is significant glaring. "Maintain positions until we verify. And someone tell Private Henderson he's on stable duty for the next month." The tension begins to drain from the situation like air from a punctured balloon. Soldiers on the walls remain at their posts but relax slightly. The reserve formation in the center starts to shift and mutter, men complaining about Henderson and his trigger-happy tendencies. You gather this isn't Henderson's first false alarm. "Told you," Kowalski says. "Cattle. Probably a dozen head that wandered away from one of the civilian ranches and got curious about the fort. Henderson sees movement, panics, fires a shot, and suddenly 60 men are standing in formation at midnight. But here's the thing. Nobody really seems angry about it. Annoyed, yes. Ready to mock Henderson mercilessly, absolutely. But not genuinely upset, because this is exactly what's supposed to happen. But here's the thing. Nobody really seems angry about it. Annoyed, yes. ready to mock Henderson mercilessly, absolutely. But not genuinely upset, because this is exactly what's supposed to happen. Better 100 false alarms than one missed genuine threat. The standing orders are clear. When in doubt, raise the alarm. The army would rather have soldiers complaining about interrupted sleep than explaining to widows why their husbands died because someone hesitated to sound a warning. Captain Morrison dismisses the formation after about 10 minutes of verification that the threat was indeed wayward cattle and not a cleverly disguised raiding party using livestock as cover. The soldiers trudge back to the barracks, most of them griping good-naturedly about Henderson's cattle identification skills. You catch fragments of the ongoing mockery drifting up from the parade ground. Couldn't tell a cow from a war party. And next he'll be shooting at tumbleweeds. The barracks doors bang shut, lamps are extinguished, and the fort settles back into its nighttime routine. Except not everyone returns to sleep. Movement near the hospital building catches your attention, a lamp being lit, a door opening, a figure stepping out onto the small porch. Even at this distance and in poor light, you can identify the fort's contract surgeon, Dr. Wellesley, by his distinctive civilian clothes and the medical bag he carries everywhere like a third arm. Surgeons making rounds, Kowalski observes. Standard procedure after any alarm. Check for injuries, twisted ankles from men running in the dark, that sort of thing. Plus, Henderson probably needs his ears checked after the sergeant gets done yelling in them. You watch Dr. Wellesley cross the parade ground toward the guardhouse, where Henderson is presumably receiving his official reprimand and unofficial mockery from Sergeant Daniels and anyone else within earshot. The hospital behind him remains dimly lit. Someone's left a lamp burning in the window, the universal signal that medical assistance is available if needed. The hospital itself is a modest wooden structure on the northwest corner of the fort, positioned deliberately upwind of the stables and latrines for what should be obvious sanitary reasons. From your elevated position, you can see its layout clearly. A main building about 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, with a smaller attached structure that serves as the surgeon's quarters. A porch runs along the front, probably designed to give ambulatory patients a place to sit in fresh air, though it currently holds only a couple of rough wooden chairs and what might be a spittoon. About an hour later, Sergeant Daniels reappears at your ladder. Kowalski, you're being reassigned to South Wall to replace Henderson, who's being reassigned to contemplate his life choices in the guardhouse. New fish. Come with me. You're helping at the hospital. This seems like an odd duty assignment until Daniels explains as you descend the ladder. Alarm was false, but Private Chen managed to spook his horse in the stables during the excitement. Horse kicked him. Probably just bruised, but the surgeon wants him observed for a few hours in case something's broken. You're literate, you can sit with him and write down if his condition changes. Plus, you look like you need to learn where the hospital is anyway. You cross the now quiet parade ground, your boots loud in the stillness. The hospital porch creaks as you climb the steps, and Daniels pushes open the door without knocking. The smell hits you immediately, a complex mixture of carbolic acid, whiskey, blood, and illness that somehow combines into the universal scent of medical facilities everywhere. It's not pleasant, but it's not as overwhelming as you'd feared. The interior consists of one long wardroom with beds along both walls, 12 beds total, though only 3 are currently occupied. The beds themselves are iron frame affairs with actual mattresses, a luxury compared to barracks bunks. Each has a small table beside it for personal effects and medical supplies. The walls are whitewashed, probably in a futile attempt to create an impression of cleanliness, and several lanterns hang from hooks, providing more light than you've seen in any other fort building. Dr. Wellesley stands at a wash basin near the door, scrubbing his hands with soap and water, a practice that strikes you as oddly fastidious for a frontier surgeon. He's a man in his late 40s with thinning hair and spectacles that constantly slide down his nose. "Sergeant," he acknowledges Daniels, then turns to you. "You're the observer?" "Yes, sir." "I'm not, sir. I'm not military." "Doctor will suffice." He dries his hands on a reasonably clean towel. "Your job is simple. Sit with Private Chen, observe his condition, and fetch me immediately if he vomits, loses consciousness, or complains of severe abdominal pain. Understood?" You nod, and Wellesley leads you to a bed near the center of the ward where Chen lies looking embarrassed and in pain. Chen's injury turns out to be less dramatic than it initially appeared. A massive bruise blooming across his ribcage where the horse's hoof caught him, but nothing obviously broken. He's stripped to his waist so Dr. Wellesley could examine the damage, and the bruise already shows spectacular colors ranging from deep purple to yellowish green around the edges. Winchester got me good, Chen admits, wincing as he tries to find a comfortable position. That's what I get for approaching him from the wrong angle during all the excitement. Dr. Wellesley has left you with written instructions on a small slate. Note any changes in breathing, consciousness, or pain level. Wake me if patient deteriorates. The doctor himself has retired to his adjacent quarters, presumably to attempt sleep before the next medical emergency. You settle into a wooden chair beside Chen's bed, trying to look alert and medical despite having absolutely no training for this. The hospital ward is quiet except for the breathing of the 3 patients and the occasional creak of the building settling. Besides Chen, there's a private at the far end recovering from pneumonia. You can hear the wet rattle of his breathing even from here, and another soldier closer to the door who appears to be sleeping off what's probably a spectacular hangover, rather than any actual injury. The Army's definition of medical care encompasses a fairly broad range of conditions. You don't have to stare at me, Chen says after a few minutes. I'm bruised, not dying. Read something if you want. He gestures to a small shelf near his bed holding a few well-worn books, donated reading material for patients with nothing else to do but heal. You pick up a copy of what turns out to be a medical text, several years out of date but still presumably more current than whatever Dr. Wellesley learned in medical school. Flipping through it provides a crash course in frontier medicine's greatest challenges: dysentery, arrow wounds, gunshot trauma, frostbite, heat stroke, scurvy, and a delightful chapter on removal of foreign objects from various bodily cavities. The illustrations are detailed enough to be educational and disturbing enough to make you grateful you ate several hours ago. A quirky fact catches your attention in the section on medical supplies. Frontier surgeons often carried more whiskey than actual medicine, using it as antiseptic, anesthetic, and general cure-all. The text debates the proper ratio of medicinal versus recreational whiskey consumption for optimal patient outcomes, which seems like a scholarly debate that probably has no good answer. Historians still argue whether frontier medicine represented the bleeding edge of trauma care innovation or just desperate improvisation with inadequate resources. But reading this text, you're leaning toward the latter. After about an hour of observation during which Chen's condition remains stable and boring, Sergeant Daniels returns. Chen's not dying? Doesn't appear to be, Sergeant. Excellent. You're back on guard duty. Kowalski's rotation is ending, and I need someone on the west wall who won't shoot at livestock. He jerks his thumb toward the door. Move out, same position as before. You return to the firing platform, climbing the ladder into the pre-dawn darkness. The night has reached that peculiar stage where it's coldest and darkest, the hours before sunrise when everything feels suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. Your replacement partner is a corporal named Davies, who acknowledges your arrival with a grunt and then largely ignores you, content to stand his watch in silence. But something's different now. As your eyes adjust to the darkness again, you notice what you couldn't see earlier. Faint glows on the horizon, visible only because you're elevated above the stockade wall and the prairie is so relentlessly flat. Distant fires, maybe 3 or 4 of them, scattered across the landscape at what you estimate is several miles distance. See those? You ask Davies, pointing. He barely glances in that direction. Saw them an hour ago. Probably Lakota hunting camp, or maybe Cheyenne. Could be our own scouts bedded down for the night. Could be anything. His tone suggests he's already run through this analysis and reached the conclusion that worry serves no purpose. Standing orders say we note it in the log, watch for changes, and don't panic unless they start getting closer or multiplying. The fires flicker at the edge of visibility. Small points of orange light that might be campfires or might be your imagination filling in details that aren't really there. From this distance, there's no way to determine who built those fires or what their intentions might be. The prairie is home to various groups, friendly native scouts employed by the Army, hunting parties from the nearby reservation, potentially hostile bands moving through the territory, civilian traders, or even other army patrols. The hours that follow achieve a special kind of tedium that can only be experienced on night guard duty. Time doesn't flow normally when you're standing in darkness staring at nothing. It stretches and compresses unpredictably. Minutes, feeling like hours, while entire hours somehow vanish without leaving any memory of their passing. You find yourself checking the stars to gauge time, watching constellations creep across the sky with agonizing slowness. The Big Dipper has moved maybe half a finger's width since you last checked, which could mean 15 minutes or could mean 3. Hard to tell. Davies remains largely uncommunicative, which initially seems unfriendly but gradually reveals itself as simply efficient. There's nothing to say. You're both doing the same thing, watching the same darkness for the same potential threats that statistically won't materialize. Conversation would just be noise filling silence that has its own value. Besides, talking makes it harder to hear approaching problems. Not that you can hear much over the constant wind anyway. Your mind begins to wander, which is simultaneously dangerous and inevitable. You think about the meal you'll eat at breakfast, probably the same salt, pork and hardtack from dinner, maybe with some fried potatoes if the cook feels ambitious. You think about the letter you should write home, explaining that you've arrived safely at your posting and the frontier is exactly as boring as everyone promised. You think about the fact that you're standing on a wooden platform in the middle of a vast emptiness, performing a task that ancient soldiers were probably doing when Rome was still a collection of huts, and will probably continue doing until warfare evolves into something unrecognizable. The psychological effects of frontier guard duty were well documented by army surgeons who noted increased rates of what they called melancholia among soldiers assigned to isolated posts. Standing alone in darkness for hours triggers strange mental states, mild hallucinations, existential dread, and what one medical report diplomatically termed excessive philosophical contemplation, unsuitable for military effectiveness. Historians still argue whether these symptoms represented genuine psychological trauma or just normal human responses to abnormal circumstances. But you're currently experiencing what might be both simultaneously. Around what you estimate is 3 a.m., the void hour, the lowest point of human circadian rhythm. You notice movement. Actual movement, not imagined. Something large shifting in the grass about 100 yards out. Your hand tightens on your rifle, and you lean forward slightly, trying to get a better angle. Davies notices your tension. See something? Movement, maybe 100 yards, 2 o'clock from my position. Davies peers into the darkness with the intensity of someone whose life might depend on accurate threat assessment. Long seconds pass. Then, buffalo. Single bull, probably wandered away from his herd. See how he moves? Head down grazing, no urgency. He relaxes again, won't come closer. They avoid human structures when they can. Sure enough, as your eyes adjust and focus, you can make out the massive shape of a buffalo moving slowly through the grass, completely unconcerned with the fort or its occupants. The animal is enormous even at this distance, probably weighing close to 2,000 pounds, a walking mountain of meat and fur that once numbered in the millions across these plains. Now their populations are declining rapidly, as professional hunters slaughter them for hides, deliberately destroying the primary food source of the plains tribes in what amounts to ecological warfare disguised as commerce. The buffalo eventually wanders out of sight, and you're left with the darkness again. Your legs are starting to ache from standing, your shoulders tight from maintaining alert posture for hours. There's an art to standing guard duty comfortably that you haven't mastered yet. The veterans know how to shift weight, adjust stance, and maintain readiness without exhausting themselves. You're still in the phase of doing everything wrong and paying for it with muscle fatigue. First long watch? Davies asks, apparently reading your discomfort in your posture. That obvious? You're standing like you're waiting for a hanging. Relax your shoulders, shift your weight more. You've got another hour before relief. Might as well not destroy your back in the process. He demonstrates a sort of modified lean against the wall that somehow still looks alert. See? You can rest and watch simultaneously. The army doesn't actually require you to suffer, just to stay awake. You attempt to copy his posture and immediately feel the difference. Who knew guard duty had ergonomics? Davies watches your adjustment with what might be approval or might be amusement, hard to tell in the darkness. You'll figure it out. Everybody does. Or they break down crying and get reassigned to kitchen duty, where at least you can sit while peeling potatoes. The distant fires you noticed earlier have mostly died down now, just faint glows that occasionally flicker when someone adds fuel. No changes in number or position, which according to Davies's earlier assessment means they're probably not an immediate threat. Around 4 a.m., something changes in the quality of the night. It's not visible exactly, more a feeling the darkness seems to deepen, the temperature drops another few degrees, and the constant prairie wind that's been your companion all night finally, mercifully, dies away to almost nothing. The sudden stillness is so profound it's almost alarming after hours of constant wind noise. Your ears ring slightly in the absence of that familiar rushing sound. This is the pre-dawn stillness, the coldest and quietest hour of the entire 24-hour cycle. The Earth has been radiating heat into space all night, and now reaches its minimum temperature just before the sun returns to reverse the process. The air feels different, denser somehow, pressing down with a weight you couldn't detect when the wind was moving it around. Your breath comes out in visible puffs now, small clouds that hang in the motionless air before slowly dissipating. Even the prairie itself seems to be holding its breath. The constant whisper and hiss of grass moving in the wind has stopped, leaving behind a silence so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. No coyotes call, no owls hunt. The horses in the stables below have gone quiet, probably sleeping, standing up in that peculiar way horses manage. Somewhere in the barracks, someone coughs. The sound carries across the parade ground with startling clarity in the still air. Davies has gone completely motionless beside you, not from vigilance, but from that semi-conscious state that experienced guards achieve, where they're technically awake but barely present. You don't disturb him. There's nothing happening that requires two fully alert minds anyway. The darkness stretches away in every direction, the prairie transformed into an abstract void where distance and detail cease to have meaning. Those distant fires you were watching earlier have completely died out now, leaving no reference points beyond the stars overhead. The stars themselves seem brighter in this deepest darkness, so numerous and vivid they create almost enough light to see by. The Milky Way cuts across the sky like a luminous river, and you can pick out individual constellations you learned as a child. Orion just rising in the east, the Big Dipper rotating around Polaris, Cassiopeia in her chair. Frontier soldiers often become amateur astronomers out of sheer boredom, learning to navigate by stars and tell time by constellation positions. It's practical knowledge out here where clouds or equipment failure can leave you genuinely lost in darkness with only the heavens for guidance. Your eyes have achieved their maximum darkness adaptation now, pupils dilated as wide as they'll go. Your vision shifted mostly to the rod cells that detect movement and light rather than color or detail. In this state, you can see surprisingly far. The creek is visible as a dark line against the slightly less dark prairie, and you can make out individual cottonwood trees perhaps 200 yards distant. Everything is shades of grey and black, a monochromatic landscape that looks like a charcoal drawing come to life. A quirky phenomenon of extreme darkness adaptation. You can sometimes see your own blood vessels. If you look at a bright star and then shift your gaze slightly, you might notice a branching pattern overlaying your vision, the shadow of capillaries in your retina, visible only when your eyes are desperately gathering every available photon. You test this, staring at Sirius and then looking away, and sure enough, there's that strange tree branch pattern floating in your visual field. It's both unsettling and fascinating. The cold is becoming genuinely uncomfortable now. Your wool uniform helps, but your hands are starting to go numb despite being tucked under your arms when you're not actively holding your rifle. Your feet feel like blocks of ice inside your boots. This is September in a few months. This same watch rotation in January will be genuinely dangerous, with temperatures dropping low enough to cause frostbite in exposed skin within minutes. Soldiers have lost fingers and toes to winter guard duty, unable to maintain circulation while standing motionless for hours. In the profound silence, you become aware of sounds you couldn't detect earlier. There's a rhythmic creaking from somewhere in the fort, probably just wood contracting in the cold, but it sounds almost alive, like the fort itself breathing. Water drips somewhere, probably condensation from temperature differentials. Your own clothing rustles slightly when you shift position, each movement suddenly loud in your ears. The isolation becomes particularly acute in this hour. You're surrounded by 60-some soldiers in the barracks below, officers in their quarters across the parade ground. But you might as well be the only person alive. The darkness and silence create a bubble of solitude that feels absolute. Davies beside you might as well not exist. He's just another vertical shadow, barely distinguishable from the stockade posts. Your mind enters a strange state, not quite awake, not quite asleep, but something in between. Your mind enters a strange state, not quite awake, not quite asleep, but something in between. Time becomes even more elastic than before, and you catch yourself swaying slightly, jerking back to alertness when your balance shifts. This is dangerous. Falling asleep on guard duty is a court-martial offense, but fighting exhaustion after hours of monotonous darkness while cold and bored is like fighting gravity itself. You walk a few steps along the platform, stomp your feet to restore circulation, anything to maintain consciousness. The eastern horizon begins its transformation so gradually you don't notice at first. The absolute black of night slowly, imperceptibly, shifts to something marginally less black. Not light exactly, just a reduction in darkness, the sky taking on a deep navy quality that suggests the sun exists somewhere beyond the curve of the earth and is considering making an appearance eventually. Stars begin to fade at the horizon while remaining brilliant overhead, creating layers of visibility that change minute by minute. Davies stirs, straightening from his semi-conscious lean with a grunt. "Almost sunrise?" he observes, his first words in over an hour. "Relief rotation should be coming soon." His voice sounds loud after so much silence, almost startling in its mundane normalness. And then, precisely at 5 a.m. by some bugler's internal clock or actual timepiece, the morning call shatters the pre-dawn peace like a hammer through glass. Reveille, the most hated sound in military life, blasts across the fort from the direction of the guardhouse. The bugle notes are aggressive, cheerful, and utterly unsympathetic to the fact that most of the fort's population is still deeply asleep. The melody, if you can call it that, seems specifically designed to be as annoying as possible, each note a personal assault on the concept of rest. The effect is instantaneous and spectacular. Below you, the barracks explode with activity. Doors bang open and soldiers stagger out like refugees from a disaster, most of them still half asleep and all of them cursing the bugler, the army, and their own life choices that led them to this moment. Some are partially dressed, others have apparently slept in full uniform, and at least one emerges wearing only his long underwear before realizing his mistake and ducking back inside to the hoots and jeers of his companions. "Get up, get dressed, get out." Sergeant Breckenridge's voice carries across the parade ground with the force of cannon fire. He's already in full uniform, somehow managing to look alert and angry simultaneously, which seems to be his default state. "We don't have all day for your beauty sleep, though God knows most of you need it. Your relief rotation arrives 2 soldiers climbing the ladder, with the slow movements of men who've been woken too early but are at least conscious enough to climb. One is Mackenzie, who you shared the barracks with last night. He looks terrible, with sleep creases on his face and his eyes barely open. "Your watch is over," he mumbles. "Lucky bastard. Go get some sleep before inspection." You descend the ladder carefully, your legs stiff from hours of standing and your body temperature dropped low enough that movement feels difficult. The parade ground is filling with soldiers in various states of dress and wakefulness, most gravitating toward the washing facilities. A line of pumps and basins along the east wall where men can attempt basic hygiene before the day's duties begin. The washing area is crowded and chaotic. The iron pumps, requiring vigorous handle work to produce water, create a rhythmic clanking that joins the general morning noise. Soldiers take turns pumping for each other, the icy water splashing into tin basins that were probably last cleaned during the previous administration. The water is shockingly cold, drawn from the same well that supplies the fort. It hasn't warmed up overnight any more than you have. You splash your face and immediately regret it, the cold making your skin tingle and your breath catch. A quirky morning ritual you witness. Some soldiers have developed elaborate washing hierarchies, with corporals getting first access to the cleanest water, while privates wait for their turn at increasingly grey liquid that's been used by multiple previous faces. Nobody complains rank has privileges, even in basic hygiene. Historians still argue whether the army's strict rank structure represented necessary military discipline or just institutionalized hazing that extended to every aspect of daily life. But watching a sergeant casually cut to the front of the washing line, you suspect the latter. The soap situation is even worse than the water. The army issues harsh lye soap that could probably strip paint, and most soldiers use it sparingly, if at all, preferring to save their subtler purchased better soap for special occasions. You retrieve your precious 50-cent soap from your pocket, use just enough to feel cleaner without wasting it, and carefully wrap it back up before someone decides it needs a new owner. Shaving presents another challenge. Regulations require soldiers to be clean-shaven, except for authorized mustaches, which means daily scraping with razors of varying sharpness and quality. Shaving presents another challenge. Regulations require soldiers to be clean-shaven, except for authorized mustaches, which means daily scraping with razors of varying sharpness and quality. You watch the private next to you attempt to shave using cold water and a blade that looks like it last saw a strop during the Hayes administration. The result is predictably bloody small nicks appearing on his jaw and neck that he dabs at with a rag while cursing under his breath. You make a mental note to acquire a better razor from the sutler when your next pay arrives, assuming the paymaster actually shows up this quarter. Back in the barracks, the chaos continues as 60 men attempt to dress in regulation uniform order simultaneously in a space designed for maybe 40. The drill is specific. Drawers first, then undershirt, wool shirt, trousers, suspenders, boots, jacket. Everything has its prescribed order, and everything will be inspected. You pull on your uniform, still slightly damp with yesterday's sweat because there hasn't been time to properly air it out, and begin the process of making yourself presentable by army standards. The uniform itself is a study in practical discomfort. The wool trousers are heavy, scratchy, and retain odors with impressive tenacity. The blue wool jacket, officially described as uniform coat, enlisted, mounted service, features brass buttons that require polishing and a collar that seems designed to slowly strangle you throughout the day. The boots are leather, barely broken in, and guaranteed to produce blisters until your feet develop calluses thick enough to count as armor. You lace them tight, knowing that loose boots mean twisted ankles, and twisted ankles mean light-duty assignments that somehow always involve the worst jobs available. Equipment inspection comes next. You lay out your gear on your bunk in the prescribed manner: rifle, cartridge, belt, canteen, haversack, mess kit, all positioned exactly as the regulations diagrams show. Mackenzie, back from his guard rotation and looking even more exhausted, does the same at his bunk. "First full inspection?" he asks, glancing at your careful arrangement. "Yes. You're doing it wrong. Belt buckle needs to face outward, canteen strap coiled clockwise, mess kit with the handle at 3 o'clock position." He demonstrates the corrections with the weary patience of someone who's been through this hundreds of times. Breckenridge will notice. He notices everything. It's like his superpower, except instead of fighting crime, he fights improper equipment arrangement. You make the adjustments while around you other soldiers perform similar rituals. Some are meticulous, laying out gear with the precision of a surgical display. Others are sloppy, clearly calculating that the punishment for poor arrangement is worth the extra few minutes of sleep they gained. A private 3 bunks down is frantically trying to polish his boots with spit and a rag, attempting to achieve in 30 seconds what should have taken 30 minutes of proper care last night. The bugle sounds again, assembly call. "Here we go." Sergeant Breckenridge roars from his office. "Company D, fall in." And by fall in I mean form a proper line, not the shambling mob I currently see. You grab your rifle and join the exodus onto the parade ground, where the early morning sun is just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. The temperature has started its climb from the pre-dawn cold, but the air still carries enough chill that your breath makes small clouds. The parade ground, which looked almost peaceful in darkness, now reveals itself in harsh morning light as a dusty rectangle trampled bare by thousands of boots and countless hours of drilling. The company forms up in 4 ranks, each man finding his assigned position in the formation. You end up in the 3rd rank, 2nd squad, surrounded by soldiers who range from half awake to moderately conscious. The ranks dress themselves automatically, soldiers shuffling sideways to achieve proper spacing and alignment, the result of endless drill practice that's beaten the proper formations into muscle memory. From above, you'd probably look almost military. From within the formation, it feels more like controlled chaos, barely maintaining structure. Captain Morrison emerges from his quarters, followed by Lieutenant Harper and the other company officers. The captain looks improbably fresh for this ungodly hour, his uniform crisp and his bearing suggesting he's genuinely happy to be awake. Lieutenant Harper, by contrast, looks like he's questioning his West Point education and wondering if it's too late to become a civilian. The officers take their positions at the front of the formation. Company, attention. Breckenridge's command cracks across the parade ground. 60 men snap to attention with varying degrees of precision, heels together, rifles at their sides, eyes forward. You try to mimic the stance of the veterans around you, spine straight, chin up, staring at the back of the head of the man in front of you without actually seeing anything. Captain Morrison begins his inspection, walking slowly down the 1st rank with Sergeant Breckenridge at his side like a particularly judgmental shadow. Orchestrated narrative continuation toward completion target. I'm at about 750 words. I need to continue the inspection scene and wrap up to 1,000 words, ending with the standard format. The captain pauses occasionally to examine a rifle, check a button, or make a quiet comment to Breckenridge that results in notes being made in the sergeant's ever-present ledger. You can't hear the specific critiques, but you can see the soldiers being inspected. Some stand perfectly still, others fidget nervously, and at least one looks like he's praying for divine intervention. The inspection process is thorough to the point of absurdity. Morrison checks for proper shaving, running a hand along jaws to feel for stubble. He examines brass buttons for tarnish, boots for proper polish, uniforms for stains or damage. Rifles get particular attention. He checks that each Springfield's action operates smoothly, that the barrel is clean, that no rust has appeared overnight. One soldier gets called out for a dirty rifle, his name added to Breckenridge's list, along with what you assume is a future work detail assignment designed to teach the importance of weapon maintenance. As the captain progresses through the ranks, getting closer to your position, you feel your heart rate increase. Every button suddenly feels improperly fastened. Every spot on your uniform looks like a glaring stain. Your rifle seems to weigh wrong in your hands. The soldier next to you whispers, without moving his lips, a skill you'll need to learn. Don't lock your knees, you'll pass out. The inspection reaches your rank. Morrison stops directly in front of you, his eyes conducting a rapid assessment that probably catalogues 40 deficiencies you weren't aware of. New replacement, he observes, not unkindly. First morning? Yes, sir. Uniforms acceptable. Rifles clean. You'll do. He moves on to the next soldier, and you release a breath you didn't know you were holding. Breckenridge, following behind, gives you a look that suggests he's reserving judgment but willing to be pleasantly surprised. Or maybe that's just his face. Hard to tell. The full inspection takes 20 minutes, during which you stand at attention trying not to think about how badly you need to use the latrine, or how much your feet hurt in these boots, or how hungry you are after a night of guard duty with no food. Finally, Morrison completes his circuit and returns to the front of the formation. Adequate, he announces, which from a captain apparently counts as high praise. Sergeant Breckenridge will post duty assignments, dismissed to breakfast. The formation breaks with audible relief, soldiers heading toward the mess hall in a controlled stampede. The day has officially begun. The mess hall is packed with soldiers who've survived the night, either through actual duty or just managing to sleep through bugle calls and false alarms. The same serving line from last night dispenses what is essentially the same meal with minor variations. Salt, pork, hardtack, beans, and coffee that could dissolve nails. But this morning, someone in the kitchen has managed to produce actual fried potatoes, their presence on your plate feeling like an unexpected gift from the culinary gods. You find a seat at the long tables, wedging yourself between Mackenzie and a corporal you haven't met yet. The eating process is exactly as perfunctory as dinner was, fuel intake, not dining. Around you, conversations flow in fragments. Complaints about guard duty assignments, speculation about the day's work details, crude jokes that wouldn't survive contact with polite society. The overall noise level is substantial, 60 men talking, eating, and scraping tin plates, creating a wall of sound that's somehow comforting in its mundane normalcy. Through the mess hall windows, the sun continues its climb, transforming the sky from pink to orange to the pale blue that promises another clear prairie day. The fort is fully awake now. You can see soldiers moving between buildings, horses being led from stables, officers consulting in small groups. The machine of military routine has engaged fully, everyone slotting into their assigned roles with the efficiency of long practice. Breakfast concludes quickly, and you emerge back into the parade ground to find Sergeant Breckenridge posting duty assignments on a board outside the company office. Soldiers crowd around, checking their fates for the day. You work your way forward and find your name. Stable detail, 0800 to 1200. Company clerk 1400 to 1700. So your morning will be spent shoveling horse manure, and your afternoon copying Breckenridge's endless paperwork. Could be worse, at least neither assignment involves being shot at. The stable detail assembles near the cavalry stables, a work party of 8 soldiers under the supervision of Corporal Hennessy, who looks even less pleased about this assignment than the men he's supervising. Right, he begins without preamble. 40 horses, 40 stalls, all of which need mucking out before noon. You know the procedure: old straw out, stalls swept, fresh straw in. Don't agitate the horses, don't steal anything, don't die stupidly. Questions? Nobody has questions. Or at least nobody wants to admit ignorance in front of Hennessy. The work begins immediately. You're assigned a pitchfork and a wheelbarrow and directed to the first stall, where a cavalry mount eyes you with the deep suspicion horses reserve for strangers wielding tools. The process is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. Fork out the soiled straw bedding, load it into the wheelbarrow, transport it to the manure pile behind the stables, return, sweep the stall floor. Repeat 40 times. The work is backbreaking and monotonous, but there's something almost meditative about it once you settle into the rhythm. Fork, lift, toss. Fork, lift, toss. The repetitive motion allows your mind to wander while your body operates on autopilot. Around you, other soldiers engage in similar labor, some working in companionable silence, others maintaining running conversations about nothing in particular. The horses gradually accept your presence, returning to their own concerns once they determine you're not a threat. Private Chen appears midway through the morning, moving gingerly from his horse kick injury, but apparently recovered enough for light duty. Survived your first night, he observes, taking up a pitchfork. That's something. Barely. It gets easier. Or you get more numb to it. Hard to tell the difference. He begins working on the stall next to yours, his movements careful to avoid stressing his bruised ribs. The routine becomes background noise eventually. Wake up, inspection, work details, meals, guard duty, sleep, repeat. Days blend together, until you can't remember if something happened last week or last month. The sun climbs higher, and the temperature inside the stable rises accordingly. The combination of physical labor, accumulated body heat from 40 horses, and inadequate ventilation transforms the building into something approximating a sauna. You're sweating through your wool uniform within an hour, the fabric clinging unpleasantly to your skin. Several soldiers strip down to their undershirts, accepting the certain reprimand for being out of proper uniform as a fair trade for not dying of heat stroke. Around mid-morning, a water break is called. You join the general migration to the pump, where soldiers take turns working the handle and dousing themselves with cold water that feels like salvation. You drink deeply from your tin cup, the water metallic tasting but refreshingly cold. Someone makes a joke about the water quality. Another responds with a crude comment about what the horses contribute to the well system, and suddenly everyone's laughing at humor that's more about exhaustion than actual comedy. The work continues through late morning. Stall by stall, the stable transforms from disaster zone to merely dirty, and finally to something approaching acceptable military standards. The manure pile behind the building has grown substantially. Local farmers will eventually purchase it for fertilizer, creating one of the few fort operations that actually generates revenue rather than consuming it. Noon arrives with another bugle call, and Corporal Hennessy conducts a final inspection of the work. He finds fault with approximately half the stall's legitimate issues in some cases, pure sergeantly perfectionism in others, but eventually declares the detail complete. Dismissed to noon mess. Report back to your barracks after. And someone tell Private Morrison he missed an entire corner in stall 23. He's got cleanup duty tonight. You trudge back toward the barracks, your muscles already protesting the morning's labor, and your uniform thoroughly soaked with sweat and probably other things you'd rather not identify. The parade ground shimmers in the midday heat, and across the fort, life continues its eternal military rhythm. Another bugle sounds mess call for the noon meal. The cycle repeats, endless and unchanging, one day bleeding into the next in this isolated fortress on the prairie frontier. The evening settles over the fort with familiar gentleness now, the sun painting the stockade walls in warm amber light that softens every rough edge and weathered surface. You've completed your clerk duties, copying rosters in careful handwriting until your fingers cramped, and now you stand once more on the firing platform as dusk approaches, watching the prairie transform from gold to purple to the deep velvet blue that precedes full darkness. The day's heat has faded into comfortable warmth, and the ever-present wind carries scents of grass and distance and possibility. Below, in the fort, lamps begin their evening appearance, small points of light marking the boundaries between day and night, civilization and wilderness. The horses are settled in their stalls, soldiers are gathering in the barracks for their evening routines, and somewhere a harmonica plays a melody so gentle it might be a lullaby. The coyotes will sing soon, and the stars will emerge in their thousands, and the long watch will continue as it has for countless nights before this one, and will for countless nights ahead. But for now, there's just this moment, the soft transition between day and night, the quiet satisfaction of duties completed, the strange peace that comes from being exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're meant to do. The frontier stretches away in every direction, vast and unknowable, but here, within these wooden walls, is order, routine, and the simple comfort of a place to rest. Your eyes grow heavy, watching the prairie fade into darkness, the day's labors pulling you towards sleep, and you let yourself drift there, safe behind the stockade. Another soldier in an endless line of soldiers who've stood this watch and found their peace in the rhythmic certainty of military life on the American frontier. Sleep well, knowing the watch continues, the fort endures, and tomorrow brings only more of the same blessed, boring routine.